Hello, and welcome to my channel, where I explain leftist topics in as brief and understandable a fashion as I possibly can. The purpose of this video is not to convince you that I am right, but to explain my interpretation of the leftist point of view. Because if you are going to disagree with it, you should at least know what it is you disagree with. With that in mind, I hope the discussion in the comments stays focused on understanding rather than mockery. Today's topic is the concept of systemic racism, and the misconceptions around it. Many hear the phrase, systemic racism, and assume that means there are rules within the system that are explicitly racist, such as white-only venues or segregationist policy. However, in modern society, that sort of thing is very uncommon. It can be helpful to think of systemic racism as coming in 3 different levels. Level 1, explicitly racist policies. See our earlier examples of Jim Crow-era segregationist policies. These rules are very clearly and intentionally designed to harm or otherwise negatively impact a minority group. When systemic racism is discussed in the modern sense, this is rarely the level being discussed. Level 2, subtle racist policies. These would be policies that are debatably intentionally designed to target a minority group, but that are much more discreet. You would see this in things like school uniform policy that prohibits haircuts popular among the black community, things that while seeming non-racial on the surface, have a clearly racist motivation upon closer inspection. This not to say that all policies restricting certain hairstyles are racist, just that there have been cases where that was the primary purpose the policy was enacted. Level 3, invisible racism. This is the most commonly discussed form of systemic racism, and is the least obvious of the 3. Level 3 policies are those that, while not explicitly racist in how they are written, and possibly not even intentionally racist, have the side effect of disproportionately having a negative impact on a certain ethnic group. It could be that the intent behind these policies was malicious when it was written, but whoever wrote it is likely no longer around, and it's just a rule that is followed because it remains on the books. A classic example of this is how public school districts are funded. In a fair society, you would think that a school's funding would be determined by its needs. The cost to provide adequate education for one student, multiplied by the number of students attending the school. However, this is not how most public school districts are funded. They are instead funded in part through the property taxes of a given district. Now, why would that be the case? The answer is fairly simple. Poorer neighborhoods have less valuable property, and less valuable properties pay less in taxes. This means that the budget per student in a poor district is much smaller than in a wealthier district. The result of this is that children living in poorer neighborhoods receive a far poorer education. This leads to them attaining lower paying employment in the future, meaning they can only afford to live in poorer neighborhoods, meaning that when they have kids, their kids will go to those same poorer schools, continuing the cycle. This is a classic example of a poverty trap, a system that keeps poor people poor, and rich people rich. There is nothing explicitly racist about this policy. It is a horrible practice, but it is debatable on whether the intent behind these policies is to keep minority families, who are often poorer, trapped in the lower classes. Now, given that there are also poor white people in America, they too suffer from the effects of systemic racism, but they are considered acceptable collateral damage by some of those who fight to keep the system in place. This is a common theme in systemically racist policies. They can often appear to simply be an issue of economic and social class, but as there are more minorities per capita in these lower wealth classes, they are affected by these policies more frequently. In summary, a policy is systemically racist not because it explicitly targets only minority individuals, but because it has a disproportionate impact on those minority groups. Like how removing requirements for accessibility ramps would disproportionately impact those who need to use a wheelchair to get around. This concludes our discussion on the concept of systemic racism. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. Thank you for your time.